We're here to talk about the Silicon Valley real estate market geographically and Greater Bay Area, week number 44. This is a slide that I'm thinking about introducing, so I'd love feedback. We've been following the average overbid, which is the bold gray line here. And that's simply the average of all the over and under biddings. And the data point here is what the number you get. What this graph shows is the least amount of overbidding. The bids that go under asking price are down at about 95.5%, as well as the 90 percentile, those that are going way up, that are up here at about 118%, maybe 119%, and opposed to just the average of being somewhere around 106%. You get a range, and you know that 80% of the prices are between these two. This thin gray line is the median, half or above and half or below. Just more information. You can see the huge annual cycle. If you like that information, please let me know so I can decide whether I want to incorporate it or not. Here are the data slides that we're going to be going over. And also, since you're watching this on YouTube, I'm going to try a little experiment this week, and I'm going to ask everybody for the first time to hit the like button, and I just want to see if that gives me more views. Please, if you enjoy watching these, hit the like button, and that's probably the first and only time I'll talk about the like button. Anyway, what you're seeing is the slides we'll be going over on the next roughly 35-40 minutes, and here's a summary of the data. I will point out that the list price adjustments, the seller's adjustments and ask price prior to the offer coming in, and the frequency of those reductions are actually data brought over from last week. I had a data compilation error twice this week, so I corrected it on some slides, but the graph slides here, the geographical glass, take a lot longer. With that, we'll get right into the data. Here's the active listings. What this is telling you is the active listings, the percent of active listings this week, Friday at midnight, compared to same date Friday midnight, well, not Friday midnights, but the same date for the past 10 years. You can see that most of these colors are red in Santa Clara County and Alameda County. In Alameda County, I'm doing county-wide data. I don't have the micro market data. In San Mateo County, it's basically balanced or a little bit of blue. The red indicates that it favors the seller, and that means limited inventory. And that's why these numbers in Santa Clara County are right around 0.75% of the inventory you normally do. So we're missing 25% of the inventory. In Alameda County, we're missing 33% of the inventory. In San Mateo County, there's actually a little bit of surplus of inventory. Now we're doing the same thing on the offer sides because you have to look at supply and demand. Here you also have a huge shortage of offers, but a shortage of offers favors the buyer because there's less competition. You can see in Santa Clara County, you're probably somewhere around 65% maybe. There's a little bit more variation. In San Mateo County, there's way more variation. The coast is at 45% of its normal number of offers, and the Bay Cities, the light blue, San Mateo, Belmont, those areas are at 74% of the normal inventory. Alameda County is at 70%. Roughly, you're less than 3/4 of the number of offers that you would normally expect. This is looking at the DUI for the same date for the past 10 years, just like we looked at offers, and that's the ratio. So you can see in Santa Clara County, you're right about 100%. Alameda County is a little more strong, but 92%, 93%, still basically a balanced marketplace. It's only when you're in San Mateo County that you're basically at 135% to 250% of the DUI. A high DUI is a slower marketplace, and that's why it's blue in color. Now we're leaving behind the 10-year median. That's just to give you an idea how we're comparing to history and looking at the numbers today. This is just raw numbers. What is the days of unsold inventory? And I consider anything basically between 40 and 80 to be a balanced marketplace, less than 40 to be a hot seller's marketplace, more than 80 to be a cold buyer's marketplace. You can see in Santa Clara County, you have several areas right around 25 days of unsold inventory, and a fair number of areas right around 50 days. Depending on which micro market you're in, it's either a red hot seller's marketplace or it's sort of a balanced marketplace. You go up in San Mateo County and you're right around 40 days, except for the expensive areas at 150 and the coast at 124. Alameda County is a little bit more balanced, coming in right around 25 days of unsold inventory. It's pretty much red in color, favoring the sellers. So even though we have a very low volume marketplace, we have a very fast-paced marketplace. Now, this data slide was added for those that, believe statisticians can make the numbers say anything they want to do. And I will disclose that I can make these numbers say anything I want to do. The goal of these numbers is to understand the market for me to advise my own clients and for me to act on my own behalf back when I started this. What this is looking at is what I call the long typical seller. How long is it taking the long typical seller to sell their property? And in Santa Clara County, you can see it's from 2 to 3 weeks for most parts, which is pretty quick. If you wanted to sell your home and you could sell it in 2 weekends or 3 weekends, that's pretty good. You go into San Mateo County and it's basically 3 to 4 weeks. You go into Alameda County and it's closer to Santa Clara at 2 to 3 weeks. The red in color is the faster marketplace because the fast marketplace favors a seller. The white in color is a balanced marketplace. This is the average ask price. And I will point out that this says October 28th, and that's because I had a data error that I thought I corrected, didn't quite make it, corrected it, but with the second correction, I didn't have time to go and make up the map. This map is from last week, and there is not much change from one week to the other. There's 7 new data points, you dropped rid of 7, but this gives you some idea of what the average ask price reduction is. This is what I call a very tight metric. But the huge advantage of this metric is you don't have to wait until escrow closes to find out what's happening in the marketplace. Same with this slide, the frequency of ask price reductions. Again, it's last week's data. Here, there's a little bit more variation. You can see that you have South County with 27% or 28% price reductions. Clearly, when 25% of the sellers, a quarter of the sellers are reducing their price, that sort of favors the buyer. You can see that's sort of the highest number. It's in Oakland, it's in East San Jose, and South County. Then most of the numbers are between 10 and 20%. Again, this is last week's data, but it hasn't changed much. Now we're back to current data with overbidding. This is the magnitude of overbidding. How much are buyers overbidding when they come in? And this is the average. So this includes the transactions that go below asking price. Basically, all of Silicon Valley is sort of pink in color. The weakest is San Mateo County, pretty close to a very pale white or very pale pink. But you can see in general, it's pretty good. And Oakland and Berkeley tend to continue to be the hot areas for amount of overbidding. And Oakland and Berkeley are sort of almost a oxymoron because some of the data there would indicate it's a strong seller's marketplace, and some of the data there would indicate a strong buyer's marketplace. I think what you have going on is 2 different markets. Here's the frequency of overbidding. How common is overbidding? You can see in Santa Clara County right around 70%, San Mateo County right around 50%, and in Alameda County right around 75%. A little more common overbidding in Alameda County. San Mateo County is clearly the worst. You can see that sort of in the color coding. This is now the appreciation, and I'm using the last 9 months of 2015 as my base. And what this is really doing is telling the story of the pandemic. The areas that used to be very nice locations to be in because they were close to your work center are not as desirable now, or they're not willing to pay as much of a premium, and the longer remote distances appreciated more recently because of the pandemic and not needing to go into work 5 days a week, not needing to be in there right at 9 o'clock and those kinds of things. Almost everybody in Silicon Valley had some degree of flex hours, but the magnitude of those flex hours has definitely increased during the pandemic. And you can see the appreciation range has ranged from basically 90% in Fremont to a low of 46% in Redwood City. Now we're looking at the median sold price. That's the middle number, and that's what the color is assigned by. Here, the color has nothing to do with the speed or the favor of the marketplace, simply which is the most expensive. So the redder the color, the more expensive it is. The reason I have 3 numbers is I'm looking at the 10 percentile in a geographical area, the 50 percentile or the median, and as well as the 90 percentile. You can know that 80% of the homes are in between these range, with 40% becoming between the first 2 numbers and 40% between the second 2. Instead of just following the median, as most people that follow the real estate market do, I try to provide a little more value by showing you what the most expensive and the cheapest 10% are. Again, here's a summary of what we went over. I do have this labeled 2000 on November 4th, 2023. I will point out that the frequency and the magnitude of price reductions and the frequency is data from last week, the 28th of October. Everything else is as of this week, but that was going to be more accurate than give you incorrect information. Here we're now looking at all of Silicon Valley in the blender. So we're getting away from the micro markets, and basically what you're looking at is the purple line is your inventory, and all of Silicon Valley has 81% of the inventory it normally has. It only has 69% of the offers that it has, and therefore the balance, the DUI, is at 106% of what it is. This table I'm only putting up here basically for the last line. You're welcome to look at other lines if you want. And anytime you see a date like 11/8 in the future, a date in the future, that's the data line for through midnight, because I'm on a real estate week. So November 1st is always the end of a week for me, no matter what year it's in. And then November 8th is next Wednesday, I think it is. But I want data through Friday at midnight. So I replaced the data that will be through the 8th next week, through the 7th next week, with data that's through last night, November the 3rd. The big takeaway here is last year was our record low year. In other words, for this week, this time of the year, we never had less than 1,695 offers accepted, and that's in the past 25 years. This year, we beat it by just a few. We're at 1,728. And I will point out that a year ago, all the transactions that failed have failed. Now, this year, since we're looking at offers that were accepted through last night, over the next 5 weeks, there's a good chance that number will decrease as escrows fail. I would expect the 1728 will become a new record low for not only the last 10 years, but for the last 25 years. That is noteworthy. Now what we're looking at is estimated payments, and these payments will go down fairly significantly. There has been a fairly significant reduction in interest rates just in the last couple days. The interest rates I grab is as of Thursday because I have to rely on the federal bank to get that data out. This data is lagging behind a little bit. I expect these numbers to come down fairly significantly by next week, unless there's another change early next week. Now what we're going to do is look at the ask price reductions. I believe this data is all current, including the data from this week. And the reason I say that with a little bit of hesitation is I did 2 corrections, and I did update this because this is a faster graph to update than the heat maps. What we're looking at is the distribution for a week, and a week it goes back for 5 weeks. And we start off jumping a month at a time. So we're starting a year ago on November 8th. Then we'll go to December 6th. Then we go to January the 10th. We're using the same day of the week because real estate's very cyclical. And we're using as close to the same date of the month as we can. And then when we get to 3 months, which is August the 9th, very close to August the 8th. And that's because we're using my whole week. So we're using next week's data. And then we start weekly data. Here we go. That's the bottom right there. That's the peak. And now we're going to bounce a whole lot. And just in the last couple weeks, which haven't gotten there yet, you'll see we're drifting down. And I expect that there's a drift down, there's a drift down, and there's a little bit drift down. That's the data through Friday night at midnight. I believe that data is accurate. I expect this data to jump down quite a bit. I don't expect to come all the way down to the blue dashed line, but this is just the time of the year where the market slows down a little bit. We're running into the end of the year holidays, and it's just what happens as the market slows down. That's what's important to pay attention to, is real estate has very many cycles. It has a weekly cycle, it has a monthly cycle, and that's why I've made some of the adjustments I do. I don't do anything on the calendar month anymore because it depends on how many days are Mondays, how many days are Tuesdays. I do everything on a 5-week basis, and I believe that gives you a much more accurate average of what the market's really doing. It gets rid of the cycles, and even the cycle of the monthly data is better represented by a 35-day, a 5-week average than a 4-week average. Here's looking at the amount of overbidding. And again, this data is very similar. Up and to the right is a hot marketplace. So we'll just step through. There's sort of the bottom. Now it's improving. Now it's at a plateau. And it really hasn't changed from that plateau. And that's because this data requires closing data, which takes about 5 weeks to come through. And the frequency of the ask price reductions hasn't been dropping quickly for the last 5 weeks, and therefore it's not showing up in the sale data yet, but it will get here. Now we're looking at the active inventory, and you can see that inventory right now is 2061, and that's last week's number. I remember that from last week. So you can see it's up just a little bit from 2061. This number does look accurate at 2060, 2006. So the only number that doesn't look like it got updated was the actual raw data, and maybe it is updated. It's just that seems to be the same. We won't comment too much on that, but it's the same ballpark. Here's the number of offers accepted. Here, you're right on the least number of offers you'd expect, which looks like it's 1728. What you have going on here is a series of slides where the blue is where you'd expect the market to be if it's a cold marketplace. That's the 10-year median, the 10-year 10 percentile number. The gray line is where you'd expect the market to be, the 10-year median, and the red line is going to be where you expect the market to be, the 90 percentile for a hot marketplace. And with number of offers, a hot marketplace is a lot of offers. So we have a variation from a low of 1728 to a high of 29. And right now we're right at the very bottom. Now with days on sold inventory, the opposite is true. A low number is a hot marketplace. So that's why the red is at the bottom. A high number is a cool marketplace. You'd expect to be at 39, you're at 42. You're a little bit between a typical marketplace and a cool marketplace. Here's typical. You can see that you're at 106%. Here's the days on market. So this is a little easier for a lot of people to see. Right now, the long typical seller is taking 20 days, 3 weeks to sell their property. Typically at this time of the year, it's 4 weeks, 30 days. And in a hot marketplace, it would be down at 16 days. This data set, the market is still fast paced because we're selling almost as quick as you'd would expect it to sell, clearly favoring the sellers. Here's your days on market being at 67% or 2/3 of where you'd expect it to be. You can see the downward trend in improving marketplace. I put the red horizontal line down here so you know that that side of the black horizontal line is favoring the seller. Here's the ask price information. I do believe this data is accurate. I believe I was able to get this updated. It looks like it's behaving normally. The wrong data that I had was an uptick. So the fact that this is down from last week is a strong indication that it's accurate data. You can see that you're normally at 98%, 97.9, and this is that tight criteria I talked about. So this is 97.9%. The actual data today is at 98.6%. The data you'd expect it to be is 98.9. You might think that that's not much of a difference, 0.3%. But when you look at the spread between the two, it is actually quite a bit closer to the typical line, but it's off a little bit. So you're clearly a little bit on the slow side. And a hot marketplace would be 99.5%. What this basically says is sellers price their home where they wanted to sell, and maybe these are only count successful sellers. Those that misprice their home may not sell and therefore not in this data. But if the seller adjusts their price and stays on the market, then they're included in this price. But for whatever reason, this is going to be a very tight criteria. This now is looking at, because that's such a tight criteria, when you look at the average, which gives you a better sense of what the whole market's doing, this is looking, and it's a case where you can't look at the median because the median would always be 100%. It's one of the few times when I actually use average as my benchmark instead of a median or a percentile. Here we're looking at the largest 10% only. We're taking the sellers, 100% of the sellers. We're only taking the 10% of the sellers that are taking the biggest price reduction. And in a hot marketplace, they take a 9.6% price reduction. In a typical marketplace, they take a 11.5% price reduction. Right now, they're taking a 14% price reduction. In a cool marketplace, they're taking a 15.9% price reduction. There's a little bit more spread, But again, you can see that as far as sellers reading the marketplace, it's getting to be closer to a cool marketplace than a typical marketplace. And you can see the downward trend every cycle. This is where you can see the annual cycle. Look at the curve in these lines, and that's why I added these lines. You expect a graph, to be straight horizontal lines, but these lines, especially the gray line, tells you where you'd expect the data to be, and the real value is the distance above or below the gray line for the particular data set. Here you're saying that we're taking 21% more price reductions than we typically do. Again, this is only the sellers that are taking the biggest 10% price reductions. They're taking 21% more magnitude in price reductions than they typically do based on the 10-year median. This is the frequency of those price reductions. So even though they're taking larger price reductions, the frequency of the price reductions is less than you expect, because you'd expect it to be right at 20% and you're at 17.9%. Currently, we're in the marketplace where the sellers that are missing the mark are missing it by larger amounts, but fewer of them are missing the mark. And in a hot marketplace, you only expect 11%, and I'm missing the number up here, but it's right at 30% in a cold marketplace. Right now, the frequency is only 89% of where you'd expect it to be, so less common than you'd expect. Now we're looking at the average overbid. So this is where the buyers come in and look at how much they're bidding versus how much their seller's asking. So right now, buyers are paying 5.9% above the ask price. Typically, it would only be 4.6. Buyers, even though the market is a little bit slow because there's very little choice, they're coming in and they're being aggressive in their asking price. But in a hot marketplace, you're up at 8.2%. And it's noteworthy to point out that in a cold marketplace, the least amount of overbidding you'd expect this year is 2.7%. That's almost hard for a lot of areas to understand, that when you're having a cold marketplace, you're overbidding by almost 3% of the seller's asking price. Welcome to Silicon Valley. Here is the frequency of overbidding. You can see that we're right now at 67%. So 2/3 of the sellers get more than their asking price. Typically, that would be right at 61%. In a cool marketplace, it's just under 50% at 49.5% of the sellers getting more than their asking price in a cold marketplace. So in a hot marketplace, it's basically at 75%, 3/4 of the sellers getting more than their asking price. This number does not appear to be updated from last week, but this is just sale price. The graph would be updated, so it's just maybe 1575. The sold price for Silicon Valley is still under $1.6 million. This now is looking at the 3 counties that make Silicon Valley individually. So you have Santa Clara County always in the blue, you have San Mateo County in the orange, and you have Alameda County in the gray. And the inventory in Alameda County has been growing fairly significantly in the last couple weeks. Here's October 1st, the pale vertical line. It's hard to see. Since a little bit before that, it's been rising basically since July 1st, but Santa Clara County was rising, San Mateo County was rising, so they were all rising at that time of the year. And you can sort of see that typically, it's sort of a plateau. It's only when you hit October 1st, the third faint vertical line, that you start to get on these steep annual declines. We're at a point in time when you'd expect inventory to be declining, and it is declining in Santa Clara County and in San Mateo County. But in Alameda County, it is still climbing, and it's bouncing quite a bit, which is a little bit unusual. But if you had a high inventory last week, which is what it appears you did, and you've come out of a shortage, the buyers buy up that inventory, and that brings you back down. And that's what gives you the sawtooth on active inventory. And it only happens when you've had an aggressive marketplace, and then you get a flood of listings. This is looking at the number of offers accepted. You can see that all of them are down. Alameda County is down, Santa Clara County is down, and San Mateo County is down. This is looking at days on sold inventory. The fastest marketplace is Santa Clara County at 34.7 days. Alameda County next at 43.6, and the slowest is San Mateo County at 51.5. And that's noteworthy because if you look before the pandemic, San Mateo County was usually at the bottom of the pack, and now it's been at the top of the pack. And again, that's just related to the desirability that used to be there that is no longer there for San Mateo County. This is time on the marketplace. You have Santa Clara County, the long typical seller just taking just under 3 weeks at 20 days. Alameda County just over 3 weeks at 25 days. And San Mateo County just over 4 weeks at 30 days to sell for the long typical seller. This is looking at the magnitude of price reductions. San Mateo County has the biggest price reductions at 98.5%. Alameda County is next at 98.8, and Santa Clara County has the least amount of price reductions at 99.2. So they're only taking 0.8% price reduction in Santa Clara County. Half of the price reductions are taking in San Mateo County. This is the frequency of price reductions. This may not be accurate data, so I'm not going to talk about it. What is accurate on the data is up through last week. The data point here is accurate, but seeing that huge drop and knowing the mistake that I made and knowing that that would tend to put everybody at 100%, I think this very last data point in all three areas is incorrect. This is looking at the magnitude of overbidding, and the mistake was limited to the frequency and magnitude of price reductions. So now we're looking at the magnitude of overbidding. You can see in San Mateo County that even though it's the coolest marketplace, it's still having 3% of overbidding. Clara County has 5% of overbidding. And it's a little surprising that Alameda County has 8.5% of overbidding. One, it's significantly hotter than Santa Clara County, and the inventory is growing. But that inventory growing is a fairly recent event, and the sale price data lags, which is why I like to look at the price reductions indicator first. But I suspect that this in Alameda County, that's going to be coming down and getting closer to Santa Clara County. Here's the frequency of overbidding. San Mateo County is the least at 57%. Santa Clara County is next at 67%, and Alameda County has the most at 73%. The most sellers are getting overbid in Alameda County. Here is looking at the appreciation since the last 9 months of 2015. You can see Santa Clara County has had the most at 188% or 88% appreciation. And then San Mateo is in second place at 69.6% it looks, and Alameda County is in 66.1%. Alameda County has come down in the last couple weeks, but even though they're having the most overbid and the highest overbids, their price appreciation or price now compared to 2015 is actually going down. The horizontal lines have not been adjusted to reflect the most recent data, but San Mateo County, despite being slow, has pulled away and is at 1950 as far as their median sold price. Just a couple weeks ago, they were within $10,000, or maybe it was $20,000 of each other, and now they're all off by almost $150,000. Quite a change there. This is on log paper. I prefer log paper because you can see the slopes of being the appreciation, but for those that prefer analog, here you go. And again, the horizontal lines have not been updated. The big movement was in San Mateo County up to 1.950, almost $2 million for their median sold price. Here's the monthly mortgage payment estimated for the three counties. And again, I expect this number to drop fairly significantly next week because of the drop of interest rates. I had a client that was able to negotiate with a lock-in, and just days away from closing was able to reduce the interest rate. Here is the actual raw data for those that like. The number of new listings coming on the market is decreasing as we go into the end of the year. So valley-wide, we had almost a 5% decrease in the number of new listings. And that's over a 5-week period, dropping the 6 week ago and adding the current week. You know, it should be a fairly stable number, but active inventory that's available is more constant. But the number of new listings, which is the direction of the active inventory, is off fairly significantly. You can look at whatever number you prefer. We're now leaving Silicon Valley and we're looking at the Greater Bay Area, which I bring in the cities, San Francisco and Marin, North Bay, Central Valley, and the Central Coast. And this is very valuable information, in my opinion, because it allows you to see what's going on in the greater area and sometimes change the start on the outlying areas and flip in. We're going sort of in the reverse order, starting with the numbers. And then here you look at inventory. You can see inventory is growing in every region except for the Central Coast, which would be flat. You know, you might argue that the city's actually rolled over, but in the last couple weeks it's been up. But look at the growth in the Central Valley, the North Bay, and even in Silicon Valley. All of them have been basically growing since the beginning of second quarter of this year. And going back to this, from second quarter this year through third quarter of this year, normally it's increasing. The only part that's a little unusual is the increase appears to be continuing in the increasing direction, even though normally since the beginning of fourth quarter, the trend would be downward. Here's looking at the number of offers in the different areas. Again, all three of these up here look like they've rolled over. The cities looks like it's still climbing. The Central Coast is the smallest of all of them and sort of just looks like its decline is continuing. Here's looking at days of unsold inventory. The Central Coast is the highest at 80 days of unsold inventory. The Silicon Valley is the fastest at 42 days. You have one at 56 days, 57 days, and 59 days. So the bulk of them are right just shy of 60 days or 2 months, which for Silicon Valley, I would consider that to be a hot marketplace. But you can see that Silicon Valley, clearly the purple line, is the fastest by quite a bit. The other four regions are grouped closer together, and the standout is Silicon Valley. And right now, the standout within Silicon Valley is Santa Clara County as being the fastest DUI. Here's looking at the 75th percentile of the long typical seller. Again, Silicon Valley is coming in at under 3 weeks at 20 days. Everybody else is a month to a month and a half. Again, you can see that trend. Normally, it takes a whole lot less time to market the property in Silicon Valley than anywhere else. The annual pattern from being high at the beginning of the year, rapidly improving, and then slowing down again is consistent year after year after year after year. Here's looking at the ask price reductions. So you can see that the numbers have reversed and the percentage of sellers taking a price reduction. I also question the last week data, so you might want to jump back because this data is indicating less price reductions. And again, the mistake that was in my data that I caught but didn't have time to reflect in the slides would get people closer to 100%. So just to play it safe, look at last week's data, don't look at this week's, and I apologize for that. Same with the frequency of price reductions. The decrease is because I put everybody at 100%. This data point here is going to be accurate. The point here that's labeled is going to be inaccurate. Here's the magnitude of overprice. Now this data is going to be accurate because it's completely independent of the ask price data. So you can see the ask price data in all the regions looks like it's going down. Silicon Valley in the purple's down a little bit. San Francisco, the cities is down quite a bit. The North Bay is down a little bit. The one that's down the least is Central Valley, which I'd say is basically flat. And even the Central Coast looks like it's in the downward trajectory. And again, you have to look at what you're normally doing. But now with sold price in 3 weeks, when you go back to last year, was increasing. But let's get back to a more typical year. Here you are, go back 2017, third quarter down, down, down. Silicon Valley was going up, but there was a weird quarter in Silicon Valley. So let's even go back. Let's go back to 15 because 15 was well behaved and all of them are going down. And that's why I'm using the last 9 months of 15 for my price reduction. That's actually a very typical year. And you can see the downward cycle. Normally it'd be alarming, but when you see it goes down every year at this time, it becomes less alarming. So it's very important to track everything to its normal, its typical behavior. Now we're looking at the frequency of overbidding. You can see Silicon Valley has the most overbidding at 2/3. Next is the cities at 57%. Then you have two areas being the North Bay and the Central Valley right at 46%. And the least overbidding is the Central Coast at only 1/3 of the market overbidding. Here's the appreciation for the areas, and you can see the area that had the most appreciation, believe it or not, Central Valley, followed by the Central Coast. So even though the Central Coast is hog and not doing very well, it's had the most appreciation. Those are outlying areas that I maintain would have benefited from the pandemic. Silicon Valley is third, which is a little surprising, but within Silicon Valley, it's the Alameda County and the far reaches of Santa Clara County that had the greatest appreciation to bring up the countywide data and then the Silicon Valley data. The areas that have had the least appreciation is North Bay, but then look at the cities. I mean, if you're talking about the separation here, this is the real standout, and it's way underperforming. You can see going back in time, the orange is right in with everybody else. Here's the pandemic, and then boom, from the pandemic onward, it's been underperforming. Here's the sold price. So the most expensive area is the San Francisco Marin area. Santa Clara, Silicon Valley is next at 1571, higher than Santa Clara County, pulled up by San Mateo County. Then you have the Central Coast being next, then North Bay, and the most affordable area is the Central Valley. And here's the payment, and you can see Central Valley as the lowest payment, North Bay next, Central Coast next, Silicon Valley second highest, and the city is having the highest monthly payment. And with that, we're wrapping up. This has been week number 44. You get the handout, which is posted, but you put in the green root URL, which takes you to the YouTube archive. You add in 2023 to get to the live presentation Saturday morning. You add in H2023 1107 for the date code, and you get the handout and any specific episode. I'm available for any questions. Not seeing anyone unmuting their mics. Have a great week, everybody. Take care. Bye for now.
Thanks, Rich. Have a great day.